Everdark, Episode 93, On Your Knees. Last on Everdark, one of the counselors on the Vampire Council came to dispute Daemon and Balthazar's claims as to who they are. Rude and cruel, the counselor sought to insult them both. Daemon turned him human and sent him back to the council that way as a warning to all others. Julian and Christian had headed up to the balcony overlooking the front of Ravenscroft Manor to watch the show. While both fledglings wanted to be in the action, they knew their masters wanted them tucked away.
"This is a good compromise,"
Julian had said unrepentantly when Christian had pointed out that Daemon and Balthazar had meant them to stay inside.
"And I don't see your steps slowing down, Christian."
Christian had shrugged.
"I wasn't saying that we should listen to them, just that they wouldn't consider this what they had intended." "I like the cut of your jib,"
Julian had laughed. And both of them were glad they had come out to watch, because it was a show. One of the best shows that Daemon had yet to put on so far. Not only him either. Balthazar and Daemon had worked together effortlessly to take down Councillor Devonus. The coup de grace at the end, when Daemon had turned him mortal again, had been the hardest to see. Julian had winced when the man wailed, actually wailed at his mortality. Councillor Devonus held out his hands in front of his face, as if his very skin had changed. The bodyguards, who had done a very bad job guarding him, hefted him to his feet. They no longer seemed to want to be near him, as if what he had was catching, let alone guard him. Daemon's final instructions, that he was to be brought to the other councillors as an exhibit of what would happen if they were as rude, had both Julian and Christian turning to one another and letting out choked laughs.
"I would not want to be his enemy,"
Christian said of Daemon.
"No, absolutely not."
Julian agreed.
"Armageddon really is the scariest of his powers to the vampires. Imagine being freed of mortality only to have it come back. You'd feel every second."
Christian pointed out.
"Yeah."
Julian scrubbed the back of his neck as they watched the councillor be dragged. He wouldn't walk, or maybe he couldn't walk back to the vehicle. He was still wailing. The crowd again parted for him, but like the guards, they seemed to fear mortality was catching. Julian found himself hugging himself. "That will never happen to you, my beloved." Daemon's voice rose up in his mind. "I see you came out to watch."
"How could I not?"
Julian asked, but a little guiltily.
"There wasn't any danger."
"No, but this crowd has not earned the right to see you yet," Daemon answered.
"Earned the right to see me?"
Julian frowned.
"Why would they care?"
Before he had a chance to end that sentence, Daemon mentally directed him towards the minds of the Iros vampires. Some had noticed him and Christian, and they knew he wasn't like them. "Who is that? His eyes, they're purple and not silver. That must mean it's the king's fledgling. Oh, he's beautiful, so young. Barely turned. I'm surprised he's let him out yet." Julian had retreated from the voices and the eyes upon him. He was used to being viewed by millions online, even being asked for selfies and autographs, but this was different. There was a mixture of adoration, awe, and rapaciousness in their gazes that unnerved him. But he held strong, and instead moved into a stream of moonlight, resting his hands on the balcony railing.
"They're looking at you,"
Christian murmured.
"At us, actually. Listen."
Julian gestured towards the crowd where some murmurings had started up about Christian. "Another Iros. Something is special about him. He is Iros's fledgling. I heard that Balthazar had made his first one this life. Best friends with the king's fledgling, just like their masters appear to be." Christian, who was always a little put off by their celebrity before as adventurers, was now even more nonplussed. But he didn't leave Julian alone. He stood at the railing, staring straight back at the crowd by Julian's side. "Bold fledglings," Daemon chuckled. "Very bold." Balthazar gave Christian a hard look, but then ruined it by lifting Mephi's left paw to wave at them.
"I thought he hated cats,"
Julian murmured.
"I think he was putting us on,"
Christian said dryly.
"or himself on. He loves that cat."
Julian turned towards his best friend, lips twitching.
"You aren't jealous of Mephi, are you?"
"What?" Christian looked affronted. Maybe too affronted.
Of course not. It's a cat. Not even a cat. It's a kitten. Uh-huh.
Julian responded with a grin. Christian sniffed.
Mephi is adorable, but this is a phase. Balthazar is not going to keep the kitten on his shoulder forever. Watch out. Mephi will be sleeping on your pillow. You'll have to scrunch yourself over to the side to make room for Balthazar and Mephi spooning.
Christian narrowed his eyes at Julian, which just had Julian laughing. He put an arm around Christian's shoulders. Christian shook his head but allowed the hug before he, too, was grinning. In an instant, Daemon went from being down on the ground to beside them. He had teleported, which had gasps again coming from the crowd at a show of yet more gifts. Daemon immediately put his hands on Julian's waist and obstructed the crowd's view of him.
Whoa, where'd you get the pants? And I love the feather coat. Did it take the place of the fur one?
Julian asked. Teleporting is useful, and this coat, like my fur one, is eternal. Daemon tipped his chin up and struck a pose, though it wasn't conscious.
Nice. So what brings you up here? I thought you might be greeting your subjects or whatever since they're here. Or have you left that to Balthazar?
Julian asked. He saw over Daemon's shoulder that Balthazar had called out people from his house. The members of House Ravenscroft were lining up to form a pathway that would lead from the front gate to the back garden. I will form a throne in the garden.
Out of...
Julian flushed deeply, which had Christian looking at him curiously. Daemon leaned in, his lips brushing against the cusp of his ear as he said, "The tendrils have multiple uses." Julian really blushed then.
Oh.
The next section of the podcast has been abridged. Daemon felt the excitement of the crowd below. He heard Balthazar above them all. "The king has found his prince. Isn't it beautiful? Aren't they lovely?" "Yes, they are." Christian actually clapped. Julian had thought his best friend would object to all this bowing and such, but Christian might have actually had tears in his eyes. Or maybe it was a trick of the light. Daemon got to his feet and helped Julian to his. He put a hand on both Julian and Christian's nearest shoulders. "Come, we must go to the garden," Daemon said, and teleported the three of them. There was a disorientating blur as they appeared in the middle of the garden. Julian found himself looking assiduously away from where he and Daemon had made love earlier. Christian caught the action and raised an eyebrow. When Daemon stepped away to call the tendrils to form a throne, rather than sexual objects, Julian answered his unasked question.
"The tentacles,"
Julian said, his throat tightening with excitement and a little bit of embarrassment.
"What about them? They are quite fascinating,"
Christian remarked as he watched them weave into an elaborate throne.
"Yeah, and they're really good for other things."
Julian shifted from foot to foot. Christian frowned.
"Other things?"
Julian's cheeks were nuclear once more.
"They're tensile and nimble and can go anywhere and fit anything."
He looked meaningfully at Christian, who was still frowning and stroking his chin as he tried to interpret Julian's words.
"Yes?"
Christian murmured.
"I can see... Oh."
Christian's head jerked up as he focused on Julian.
You mean... Oh, that means that you had to have had intercourse out here, in the open. Or did you do so in one of the side gardens?
Of course, Christian used the term intercourse with no embarrassment whatsoever.
Oh no, we did it here. Right here.
Julian tapped the ground where they were standing. Christian looked down at the unmarked grass.
"It is amazing how there's no sign that the tendrils have pushed up through the grass. I would expect there to be some signs of disturbance."
Christian knelt down and examined the ground minutely as Julian blushed harder and laughed a little. His best friend actually poked the ground, looking for weak spots. Finally, Christian got up onto his feet again, still peering down at the sward with scientific interest. Then he looked up at Julian.
"What did it feel like?"
Christian asked.
I have many completed gay romance series on Amazon. There's Cinders and Ashes, a gay high fantasy series loosely based on Cinderella. The Vampires Club, a fast-paced contemporary gay romance series that has vampires and takes place in a nightclub. The Bodyguard, which is a bodyguard protectee slow burn romance with a supernatural twist, and much more. Every month, I make at least 2 of these books free to download. If you want to know when that happens, the easiest way is join my old-fashioned mailing list to get free book alerts. I'll post a link to the mailing list form in the notes.
Fantastic.
Julian actually giggled. It had been more than fantastic. He had thought himself adventurous before, but he had a feeling with Daemon that the adventures were just beginning.
No, I meant, well, that is good to know, but unsurprising, as I doubt Daemon would do anything that would even cause you mild discomfort.
Christian explained.
What was the texture? The temperature? Did it change depending on… Texture was smooth, and at times ribbed or bumpy or whatever for, God, I cannot believe I'm saying this. Temperature was also variable, and yeah, it changed shape like a lot.
Julian answered, knowing his best friend would not be satisfied without a full account, though he did sound a little strangled.
That sounds quite pleasurable. Did you ask, or did he offer?
Christian asked.
I asked.
Julian held his head up high.
You were always adventurous.
Christian glanced over at the throne that was almost fully done. It almost looked like the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones, but in a phosphorescent green gold.
I just couldn't get it out of my head, so I asked, and he was more than willing.
Julian beamed at Daemon.
He would do anything for you, even kneel.
Christian smiled fondly at the Vampire King.
I would want nothing and no one less for you. You're acting like you're giving me away in marriage.
Julian laughed, but he felt how big a deal that kneeling had been. A frisson of excitement went through him.
I think we're in something quite a bit bigger than marriage, don't you? It's an eternal commitment, and while they're the only people who can feed us, we are completely in their power.
Christian said with a shrug.
You're right. I think that's partially why I didn't want to kneel at first.
Julian admitted.
Not that I think either of them would ever do anything bad to us. But they could. They wouldn't, but they could. So we both have to push back to make sure that they know we can. And so we know we can.
Christian explained.
Yeah, exactly that.
Julian nodded. He noted then that Daemon was making a smaller throne beside the larger one.
Is that for Balthazar?
Julian asked. No. Immortals stand in my presence, but you will sit. We will have a long night of greeting people, and I want you to be able to rest. Daemon answered simply as the tendrils wove into an intricate shield pattern on the back of Julian's chair. Julian blinked, and his throat grew tight.
I keep forgetting.
Daemon turned then to face him, as he must have felt the wave of emotion overwhelming Julian for a moment. What do you forget? Daemon gently asked.
That you think I'm special when it's all just you. I lived. You're the one who is all these things, who gives me all these things, and everyone else too, until you take them away.
Julian got out as he thought again of Councillor Devonus. Daemon cupped his face. Julian, you are special with or without me. You existed without me. You had a focus and life.
To expose vampires,
Julian reminded him ruefully. To avenge your parents. To show the world that there are things greater than themselves out there. Daemon reframed it. And you can still do that.
Expose vampires? I don't want to expose us anymore.
No, not expose. Introduce us, Daemon suggested.
You really want that?
Julian didn't ask if Daemon knew enough to make this decision. The truth was that Daemon was likely right to take charge of how vampires were exposed to the world. Because they would be. Science had caught up with the paranormal, or it would shortly. Better to be the one in control of how that happened and when, than to have someone video the dead rising on their phones, or a vampire teleporting, or turning into a flock of birds. There might not always be an Eiros there skilled enough to change minds, but even if there were, nothing was ever really gone from the internet. A video was uploaded, and it was there, somewhere, forever. So Daemon had the right idea, and how ironic that he did when he'd been away for so long. Yes, but first we must reconquer my empire. Daemon's hands linked with Julian's and drew him over to their thrones.
They love you already,
Julian told him.
They've been waiting on some of these leaders of theirs to get what's coming to them for a long time.
Julian carefully sat down on the throne and was surprised by how comfortable it was. The tendrils seemed to mold to his form, but did not give way so that he felt unsupported. He leaned back and felt the throne form fit to his back.
Where should Christian be?
Julian asked. By your side, while Balthazar will be by mine, Daemon explained.
And will Mephi have a place of honor?
Christian asked dryly. My battle cat is prepared to serve, Balthazar said as he came around the side of the manor, with the black fluff monster perched happily on his shoulder. Despite the dryness of Christian's tone, he beelined to Balthazar and immediately petted Mephi. He even kissed both Mephi and Balthazar, though Balthazar came first. Mephi purred.
Now they have me wanting a battle cat,
Julian murmured. I am afraid I do not wish to share you with even a sweet ball of fluff, Daemon said, still holding on to his hand and rubbing his thumb over the top of it. Besides, the kittens will know when we want them and will make themselves available. Julian just shook his head with amusement.
They definitely came to you in a hurry.
Animal magnetism, Daemon said with a smirk. The tension that was building in Julian as they waited for the subjects to appear drained away, and he laughed. He felt Daemon's confidence flowing into him. He knew that the crowd was just out of sight. The crowd is very eager to meet you, my king, Balthazar said. Meet us, Daemon corrected without heat. Meet us. Yes. Arceus and Fiona are bringing them in, Balthazar stated. I explained that there were to be no pleas, no requests, no bargaining. This was just to have the chance to bow and move along.
And how many people are staying for that?
Julian asked. Oh, all of them? Even the ones that have some kind of loyalty to Callie, Balthazar said with an Arctic smile. I guess that they think their shields are better than Councillor Devoness's.
Hope springs eternal. Besides, if they change their minds, Daemon might be inclined to forgive them.
It was Seer who spoke. Sophia led her out of the back doors of Ravenscroft Manor, though it did not seem like Seer needed the help. Even without eyes, she appeared to see better than all of them. William came out after her with a chair that he set down for her on the veranda. You should be by me, Seer, Daemon said with a slight frown, but she waved him off.
I thank you for the honor of offering that, but I will do good here. I can see their futures and advise you better.
She then addressed Christian and Julian.
And do not worry, dears. I have spoken to Elizabeth and Henry. They are watching from an upstairs window, but they will not come out. Vampires in this kind of emotional state are sometimes unpredictable, and it seemed safer to keep them inside.
Thank you, Seer,
Julian said. Christian joined in on the thanks and added,
I hope that my parents understood and were not afraid.
They're more fascinated. Your father has already started interviewing me.
Seer put a hand against her chest and giggled.
I'm sure he finds you fascinating,
Christian said.
So he claims. It is good to talk to someone appreciative,
she said. Balthazar, Christian, and Mephi joined Julian and Daemon. Christian stood beside Julian with one hand on the throne. Julian saw Christian out of the corner of his eye, inspecting the tendrils. He smothered a smirk. Balthazar stood on the other side of Daemon's throne. He touched the tendrils and jerked his hand away before settling it back down again, experimentally. Do you know that they have thoughts? Balthazar asked. And, memories? What were you two getting up to in my garden? Julian looked up at the sky and hummed. Daemon merely smiled at him enigmatically. I see. Well, I have been trying to communicate with Mephi.
We are not doing anything sexual with the kitten,
Christian cried. Balthazar blinked. No, of course not. I was just trying to show that my powers, while not as great as Daemon's, have interesting aspects to them. Seer chuckled. Elgar then drifted out as well. He was still holding on to Iros's skull, which had Balthazar sighing, but he didn't seem like he had the heart to tell Elgar to put it away. Come here, Elgar. Balthazar gestured for him to join them. You should be by my side as well. If I would not shame you, master, with my appearance, Elgar blinked. He was wearing those oversized sweats with the hood. That and the skull somehow made him look like an old-time monk. He shuffled out. You look fine. Come here. We will be getting you a new wardrobe, but this is fine, Balthazar said kindly. Elgar eagerly but shyly came to Balthazar's side. Balthazar put an arm around him and patted his shoulder. Elgar tucked against him, even as he stroked and murmured to the skull. Are you ready, my king? Balthazar asked. Yes, Iros. Bring my subjects forward, Daemon said easily. Daemon kept their hands firmly linked together as Arceus and Fiona rounded the corner of the manor with an orderly line of 4 people wide and who knew how many long streaming after them. Julian's hand tightened around Daemon's as nervousness swelled within him. Be calm, my beloved fledgling. I will let nothing happen to you, Daemon said. Julian gave a jerky nod.
Members of the Iros bloodline, King Daemon and the immortal Iros bid you welcome,
Arceus intoned in his deep voice. He and Fiona then spread apart so that the crowd could walk between them. Row after row after row of people came. Their awe was practically palpable. Most immediately dropped to their knees without even daring to look up. Others stared so long at them that they forgot to move and had to be gently nudged forward. Despite what Daemon had said to him earlier about Julian being someone that would matter to the vampires, he still couldn't quite believe it, until one person, an older-looking man with an ascetic look, appeared, gazed up at him from his knees, and put his hands together as if in prayer. Thank you, dear boy, he said in a deep, sonorous voice. Thank you for bringing our king back to us. Julian's throat went tight. Daemon stroked the back of his hand. Julian finally got out,
Daemon is the one that brought me back to life, too.
Join us next time for episode 94, Learning.
If you want to support this podcast and get the unedited episodes, we actually have something better than a Patreon. I have my own serial subscription website, wraithrain.com. It's an old-fashioned paywall site, just like Netflix or Crunchyroll. With a membership, you do get the uncut versions of Everdark with no intros, outros, or edited parts. Just the chapters as they were meant to be heard before we've had to make it all Disney safe. If this sounds interesting to you, try us out for a month. The link to sign up is in the notes. The most you'll pay is $9.95 a month, and you'll be directly supporting us, real people, not big corporations like Amazon or Netflix, not content created with AI. Wraith Rain is a small team of actual humans doing the best we can to transport you with romantic action and adventure stories. We really thank you for your support.